The work session for Thursday, May 10th, 2018 is called to order, and the clerk will please call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Jones. Here. Ms. Brown.
Present.
Mr. Hauser. Mr. Hauser is absent at the moment. Ms. Simon.
Here.
Ms. Baker.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here?
Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Mr. Schrein.
Here.
Ms. Conwell.
Here.
Council President Brady. Council President Brady is absent at the moment. There is a quorum.
Okay. Thank you very much. We expect the council president will join us in progress in a little bit. Has anybody signed in for public comment?
No, Mr. Chair, no one is signed in.
Okay. Our one main item for today is to complete the process that we started a couple weeks ago, focusing on the conclusions from the report from ZIG. We appreciate your being with us this morning, and before we start, I want to ask you a question while it's on my mind as to whether we have received the April report from the administration yet on the ERP project.
My understanding, it has not yet been delivered.
And is there any particular standard in place as to how soon after the end of the month we should receive these reports?
I would say that that's probably not very well defined.
Okay, well, I think going forward, that's something we should probably work on. Try to figure out what a fair standard would be and negotiate an agreement. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, on your point you just
Yes.
made, what is your norm for response for reports? Because this is not unusual to have a monthly report. How many days do you need at the close of the month, do you think, should be the norm? And
Strikes
then-
me, there's no reason why a monthly report could not be prepared and provided to you in less than a week.
Okay, so if we drive a stake in the ground and says the 8th of the following subsequent month is the day we want that report, that's not an unreasonable request.
I don't think so.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, please proceed with your report.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. This is a follow-up, so the bulk of this particular document are the conclusion statements that were made in the original report from 2 weeks ago. But I do want to give you some recent updates, and here's an example of the concept of timeliness. So I do have some recent updates for you, and we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about the conclusions. Then you had two specific questions of me in the last meeting, so I want to address those. And then I want to talk a little bit about a consolidated project plan, which I've been kind of talking about with the team for quite a while. So the good news is, and if you'll recall this chart, I mean, this chart is basically a picture of the overall architecture of the new system. And I think it's just important to see that the enterprise asset management piece, which is the work orders, most of that module now is operational. And you'll see over here on the left-hand side that on 3.8, 3/8 of the work orders now have been rolled out. So it's broken into 8 basic rollouts, and the third one was accomplished in this past week. So that's the good news. And that's why when I show you the list of all the 20 rollouts, I've given you that star burst right there, basically saying, okay, we've got another one that started, and that's CCTV, and they've actually processed work orders this week. So that's the good news. I do have to say that there's a little bit of sweet and sour story here, and that's the fact that the next rollout requires, I think it's approximately 72 tablets that'll be used in terms of capturing information and reporting information for the work orders. Great use of technology. There's been a hiccup in getting the tablets, and so that has pushed that out a little bit now, and it's a couple of weeks later than they thought they were going to be able to do that rollout. Okay, so this is then is the,
Okay.
Is that a vendor problem or is that a fail to order problem?
that is apparently a vendor problem. I mean, yeah. They have not they have not prepared everything in a timely manner on the tablets.
Okay, because I'm going to be a broken record on this as to where the responsibility for everyone, when you say there's an oops, please identify where the oops is if you could.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. So let's talk about the conclusions. This is the item that ended up in Cleveland.com. So I do honestly certainly think that the project is nearing a tipping point. And when I say nearing a tipping point, sometime within the next 2 months, it's going to reach a position of either we're going to have to continue moving forward, or we're going to have to make some adjustments and changes to the schedule and the resource needs. So it's starting to squeeze. Everything is starting to squeeze now in terms of available time and available resources. So that's where basically I'm talking about the fact that when you to balance there's a famous three-legged stool in project management. You have to balance resources, scope, and schedule, and you have to keep those in balance. And if they start getting out of balance, if you start running short of time, then something else has to change. And usually it's schedule, let's delay, or it's add more resources. So, and then again, this is a reminder that, right now, the way the project is planned, there are quite a few rollouts in the month of September and also in the month of December. It's going to put a tremendous amount of pressure on the county staff because having that much going on at that point in time. But that's the way it's laid out. That's the way it's being planned. And if everybody recognizes that and does the appropriate staffing and commitments, then we should be okay. But it is there and it needs to be managed very carefully. The project has been replanned. It's also being replanned again. We've got a new player and they're actually working on a consolidated project plan, which is good news because I've been very concerned about the fact that there have been disparate plans. They have not been connected. And so this activity is going on right now, and I think that's a good thing. But things are getting, like I said, tight. When I say tight, there are some sequential activities that need to take place. And when you start moving some of those sequential activities, then eventually it's going to impact that go live date, that rollover date. And that's what's starting to happen now. Okay, and it's a reminder also that it's right now there's a very, very strong desire on the county's part to make sure that HR is ready and be able to provide open enrollment. Big deal. That's a big deal. Can't really move that date unless, I mean, if you end up moving that date, then you end up deferring probably into 2019, and you end up using the current system for open enrollment, which nobody apparently wants to do. So they're very anxious to make sure the new system is being used for open enrollment. Same thing, similar thing with fiscal. I mean, at some point in time, we have to recognize that fiscal needs to be in place at the same time that HR is in place because it provides all the general ledger accounting structures and so forth. If you end up reversing those and say, well, I'll do HR and then I'll do fiscal later, then you have an awful lot of throwaway programs that are being written to make sure you link to the current general ledger. Does that make sense? So it's kind of important that you keep the sequence of saying fiscal has got to go in and HR benefits can then go in following that, okay? And in this case, it's laid out, it's for the same basic month, which is fine. Okay? We've talked before about the difference between operating expenses and project expenses or cost. The team, I think, is in general agreement that early on, an awful lot of the budgeted dollars were being considered project dollars. which meant that they were basically bouncing up against the $25 million authorization. I think they've come to the agreement that really some of those are operating expenses. Now, that means that IT is going to come with changes for their operating expenses in 2019. They're going to go up because they were buried in the project budget. But that means that you're going to have in the vicinity of $4 million out of the 25 million that's going to be available for some additional spending on the project. And that means that you've got some available money to spend if you have to do a change order with your vendor Infor to do something. I mean, so I think it's important to realize that that's there and it's available. Okay?
When building that budget, Zig, do you think that, was it anticipated that $4 million was being put into there that should never have been there when it was built, so they would have a secondary contingency?
I think that
Because it feels like that to me when you're telling me operational dollars were being put into a $25 million bonded piece of legislation that we were going out to put forth. It was only going to take somebody of your professional nature to say, wait a minute, that doesn't belong there.
The only thing I can suggest is that the original team's projection of a contingency amount, which was about $4.5 million, it's the same number. It's the same number. Only it was being looked at and treated as a contingency. I'm basically suggesting it's really just available funding in the authorization. Okay?
To follow up with that, so we've been talking about contingencies here since we've had discussions of the contingency being depleted, and then the contingency came back because of savings throughout the project that we then labeled contingency refunds. So it just seems to be a number that's bouncing around, and now we're up to perhaps back to the 4 million in a fund that at one time we heard was depleted. I guess I'm a little concerned that that 4 million that we're talking about now, that we're labeling operating, that was contingency, is just a shell game of moving money around. Can we really concretely follow the money to make sure that those dollars are as they should be and spent as they should be?
Certainly you can. I have actually, gone through some of the analyses, and the key is to lay this whole project out by month, by year, so you know when things are being spent and when the system is turned on or when the system is not turned on, those kinds of things. The kinds of things that were included in the project budget, when you look at it that way,
Yeah,
is all of a sudden you have some personnel charges that were assumed that they went for the entire year of 2019. Well, if the project is not working, if you finish the project, then the rest of the 2019 becomes an operating expense. It should not be included in the project amount in terms of costing and valuing the asset.
right.
Okay, same thing with the software charges. At some point in time, the software is being used while you develop and while you're building, but at some point in time, you say, we're done. Well, now the software charges really should be part of the 2019 operating expense. And so that's all I'm trying to suggest, and I think the team agrees with that. We're working the issue so that they can be more precise. I think there's nervousness. I have a tendency to estimate,
Yeah,
and you have to make some assumptions as to, well, when is the system going to be finished?
right.
I use 3/31. But again, what's the real detailed plan saying, and what's the team going to be able to commit to? So those kinds of things make it difficult for them to stand up and be counted of here's the amount.
Would you,
So
if I may, just so I'm understanding you correctly then, would you say perhaps this project was a $21 million capital investment with a $4 million contingency backing out whatever money they thought would have been capital but turns out to be operating?
I think 25 million is probably much closer to what you're going to need, rather than 21. I think there's a lot of pieces in the project that Infor is not doing, that there's a strong possibility that they will be asked to do. There are some things that have already started in terms of obtaining some contract project managers, which was not included in the original thinking. So those kinds of things are starting to add up. So I wouldn't be surprised at all that you'll probably use all 25 million.
I understand that we'll use it all. I'm just trying to put my head around where the dollars and follow the money of 21 and 4 instead of 25 plus 4, or backing out operating and calling it now
Sure.
capital. I mean, all that is a little hard to follow.
Conversations that I've had with the Infor folks will indicate that they think that some of their stuff has been underbid. It's been underpriced.
Okay,
So that's why, I'm thinking that, it could very easily have been instead of a $9.5 million contract, it might have been a 12.5 or something like that.
okay.
Okay, I mean, so there are pieces in there that I'm sure they would like to get paid for.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, so
Do
one
you
of
have
the
a question?
conclusions.
I'm sorry. Vice President Jones has a question.
Since the project has fallen into a silo approach, have you seen any change to move back to back to strengthening the project manager?
I think some of that is still going on. In other words, I think there's still some vertical activities happening in the project. Team members are going, up to executive steering committee members rather than rolling through a project management office and a project manager for the whole project. And some of that's still going on.
Has there been any negative impact on the project as a result of that to this point?
Well, by definition, as soon as you start managing something on a silo basis, then you immediately lose your communication across, horizontally. I mean, that's the kind of thing you have to watch out for. I'm not saying it's happening, but the potential for it to happen is certainly there in terms of going across the various work streams and going across the various players and the people.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question
Ms. Simon?
on the silo question. So what, if anything, can be done now? I'm sorry if that was asked of Councilman Jones,
Go
but
right ahead.
if we see a potential slipping happening, what, if anything, can we do now to prevent it from getting worse?
Next, you're
Oh.
an excellent straight person.
Okay,
Thank you.
segue.
Yeah, absolutely. The project management office needs to be reestablished. It was there before, it died, it needs to be brought back in. I mean, and that focuses everything into a group of people, and it also, it needs to be an organization that has some authority and responsibility delegated to it by the executive steering committee. Right now, the executive steering committee is operating at a much too detailed level, making decisions on project-related things that really, could have been done by the project managers, by the PMO, and the PMO then basically says, here are our decisions, and then you pass them on to the executive steering committee for approval, so they know and inform them, but they're not getting them into what are all the various different options of how we should do that. I mean, right now they're trying to figure out how to find the original employment date of an employee. Having problems with that. That's not an executive steering committee issue, okay? But it's certainly an important one because HR benefits are dependent upon your original hire date. And right now, they're trying to figure out how to get that. So that's an example of a detail that certainly should be and easily resolved quickly in a PMO group, and the PMO group should meet weekly. And then that way you're maintaining pace, and I've talked about this before, the importance of maintaining pace. If you have the PMO meeting weekly, if you have weekly updates to the project status report, If you have weekly reports to the executive steering committee, even if they don't meet, you're maintaining pace, you're moving, and that's what needs to happen, okay? So,
Councilman Gallagher is next.
And I don't want to put you in a box, but it seems to me that the executive team is unworkable. The structure is too much. There's too many voices in the room. Would it not be best to have one voice from the executive team, working with a project manager in the project manager's office to move this forward in a more workable fashion?
certainly there should be a single executive sponsor, okay? There's no question there should be a single executive sponsor, whoever that may be, all right? But that does not preclude the importance of having an executive steering committee so that you have input from the various executive level individuals with regard to guidance and direction of the project. Yeah, so, and that makes sense. I would actually add someone to the executive steering committee. I would add a representative, the acting director of HHS. I can't even understand why that person would not be a member of the executive steering committee. Okay, but right now we have two executive sponsors, and then we also have a new player, which is the new chief of staff. Okay, who has been directed to take care of watching over the project. So now all of a sudden you've got 3 people.
Well, it just seems for me, as a layperson, that I'm preparing for the crash. And I don't think I see anybody on the other side, or maybe I do see people on the other side bracing themselves and positioning themselves for the crash where their hands are unbroken and free and there's not going to be any heads rolling here. There will be heads rolling on this, I sense. I hope not. But if we're going the way I think we're going, and it should be only one head at the top, like I think you've suggested, the executive steering committee, I think, has too many voices in that room. I think there's too much sway in that room, and I think we need a project manager running this and let that person make the determination on where we're going. And I don't see that happening, although you're saying that the project manager office is back in.
Well, I certainly have recommended it, and the team has indicated that that's what they're going to do. Now the question is, all right, let's move on this. I mean,
Ergo.
for 2 weeks now,
Ergo, my concern, the team has said we're gonna go it, in 2 weeks, nothing's happened. If you went to the one person at the executive team that's running the show, now we've got a head we could pull up here, and I noticed none of them are here. We could pull them up here and ask them, it's been 2 weeks, what's going on? Or if they're not taking your recommendation, and that's fine too. But knowing your head's on the pillar, and they're not doing that. So my concerns grow exponentially as the weeks go by.
and I think as I mentioned in the very beginning, the tipping point's coming. Okay, but I think it's going to be happening right around the end of June. If integration testing doesn't move along and it's in good shape with regard to testing fiscal, which is that's the major big ticket item that's going to be going on in June. That has to move along. If that does not move along, I think the project is going to start hiccuping.
Councilman Toomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through the chair. So just taking a step back, kind of hitchhiking off what Councilman Gallagher was talking about. So what has the dialogue been like with you and the folks that you're dealing with on the other side? I mean, is it a back and forth? Is it they sit and they listen and say, thank you very much? Or I mean, what's it been like? I mean.
Well, I try to speak with each of the leadership weekly. You know, and I basically have set up conference calls with them, and we talk about whatever is a major topic at that point in time. The thing we've got to recognize, I mean, as you're my client, I mean, you know, the administration is not my client, and so I'm not it's very difficult for me to advise them as if I were their consultant. So I need to lead a horse to water, okay? I need to, make suggestions, and they don't have to take them.
Yeah, I mean, my concern here is when you say, we're within that 2-month range and we're basically watching this slip off the mountain, I feel compelled that we have to push the issue if that's the case, And I don't know that it's even council's responsibility to have to do that. That's the idea. That's what I'm trying to get my head around.
But I think the whole idea, we're back to, the timing of the reports and, maintaining pace. I mean, there is, if you have weekly updates to your project plan, which is a consolidated plan, so it's got everything, okay? And then if you have those weekly updates, you can have a weekly report of your progress and your status and what's going on and what's happening. It's real easy to generate a monthly report. I mean, because you've basically got all that information in your weekly report. It's just a matter of, making it pretty, whatever you want to go through. So if that's the case, then, the whole idea is then you guys, excuse me, all, sorry about that. But you have the position of where you can say, I'd like to have that report 1 week later, whatever date you pick. And in that report is where you've got to be looking and saying, okay, now are we maintaining pace? Are we moving? Are things happening? If you recall, I mean, I was trying to show you some trends, right? And we're looking at weekly reports and all, if you look at that, you say, oh. And there was one particular line item a month ago that showed no progress. Something's funny if after a month you have no progress. Now, it could be the way it was calculated. I mean, there's all kinds of things. But if I'm the project director, I'm going to ask. I'm going to say, what's happening, right? And hopefully you'll be in a position to see that sort of thing so that, like I say, I mean, if they give you this April report, then there's going to be a May report, which is going to come out hopefully within the first week, and that's the first week of June. Right around the third week of June, it's going to be, here's a whole series of weekly reports. Are we or are we not testing fiscal? And there's 235 scenarios that need to be tested for fiscal. 235, and the schedule says they have 2 weeks to do it. Okay? All right? Now, somebody, and I've already got a question out there. I've asked the question, I haven't got an answer yet, which is, how long is it going to take to do one scenario? If I can figure that out, I can certainly calculate how many people I need. Right? And can I get it done in 2 weeks? And the hooker in there is that if you're doing testing, integration system testing, you run the scenario, you validate the results, okay? And if you find a problem, guess what? You contact your vendor Infor and you say, fix it, okay? And guess what? You've got to rerun it and revalidate those activities. Now, obviously, if you don't find a problem, then you're able to go through there without saying Infor fix it. So you can do it, it's going to take a little less time.
Councilman Tron is next, followed by Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that hopefully the people are listening outside this room, because they're not in the room. But your clarity of, we are your client, I mean, that was just very forthright. Here's clarity. Your clarity of do one scenario and test that to see how long it takes to do that and multiply that times the number of scenarios that need to be done is pretty basic math. Again, clarity. Your clarity saying that we have linchpin activities that fiscal has to go live and follow that with HR. Clarity needs to be when do those testing need to be done? So, I mean, it's much worse, I believe, for HR to go live if it's not ready than it is to push it off. Because we have a disaster in the making, because we now have 7,000 employees that are really disgruntled. Not just disgruntled the way they are right now over where this project is unfolding, but you start messing with people's paychecks, things get really uncomfortable around here pretty quickly. So is there a way that you could have that same clarity about do one scenario and it has to all be tested to go backwards into how many need to be done for those two components? Because I agree with you that we have, those both all have to go live almost simultaneously, one after the other. Because I have yet to find an organization that doesn't financially work on the back of the general ledger. I mean, it's kind of basic fundamentals of how you run an organization. And if we can't go live with that, based on the scenario, and then the HR, is there a way you can actually bring that same clarity saying, here, this needs to be done, in your opinion, we as your client, on these different activities. So we can put that down and we can ask on our monthly report, how close are we to hitting those activity scenarios that are going to come in September, going to come in October, so that we can hit that? Because I would love to hold their feet to the fire to make sure, because there's nothing gets people to perform better than a date.
Absolutely. And again, I'm very hopeful that the consolidated plan that is being worked on right now, which is a good thing, finally, that's a good thing. But the other thing is to say, you need to represent where you are in the schedule. And right now, there is very little of that reporting going on. The percent completes are being done, but the percent completes are not against volume metrics. Here's the example. I mean, if you're doing 235 some scenarios for fiscal testing, pretty clear, if you have 235 to do and you've done 150, that's a percent complete. I mean, if you can say, it's numbers. You don't have to sit there and guess. It's just numbers. But they work. They tell you approximately where you are. And if it's a 2-week time frame, at the end of the first week, you better have half of those done. It makes sense to me. I mean, that's what needs to be done. That's the way that hopefully they're going to start looking at that. Because I'll be asking questions about, and I have been asking questions of, well, what level of detail are you going to put in that consolidated plan? Are you going to put in, should they put in all 287 scenarios or whatever the number is? No, but they can summarize those scenarios, which I have done already. You can summarize them into 8 or 10 different line items. And the way I summarize them is, guess what? Who has to run them? There's a budget piece in there. Budget has to run those.
There's a name associated with each one of those scenarios that has the overall responsibility to make sure that that scenario is being run.
The fiscal plan, I have looked at the detail. I mean, the fiscal testing plan does lay out dates of when they have to be run, and then which department or which subject matter expert needs to be the person or persons who literally are going to actually run that scenario. So that's there. I mean, that's good. HR doesn't have that yet. And I'm going, why not?
Okay. Ms. Baker?
Yes, just a real direct question. There's a meeting of the minds that the project management office is needed. Hasn't been implemented yet, been a couple of weeks, we don't know why it's not, but we have an agreement that there should be one. We also, from the last meeting that we held, there's a meeting of the minds that there should be a project manager. That's an important part of this. We're rolling this out and the tipping point is the end of June for fiscal. So the question is there a project manager being interviewed? Are there candidates that have been narrowed down? And when can we anticipate that project manager will be hired?
I certainly can't answer when a contract project manager would be on site. My understanding is that, yes, they are. They have interviewed one person, that person backed out a couple of weeks ago, that they have another individual that they are interviewing. I don't know where it stands in terms of bringing that person on board.
Just to follow, is that a significant accomplishment for the success of this being rolled out with fiscal in June? Or do you think the current team has the capability, without a project manager, if it's not in place, to stay on task?
Well, you've got project leadership operating on sort of an interim basis, and they have been since February.
Right.
You know, the project will continue moving. It will do better, in my opinion, if they get that person on board and if they get that consolidated plan operational. I'm supposed to get the first copy tomorrow. Okay, I will see, okay, the plan is now changed. We now have, you know, instead of 4,000 line items, maybe it's going to be 6,000. I don't know. I mean, but that's what it's going to take to bring it all together,
Yeah.
type of thing. So I think if those things happen, you're going to get much more controlled and organized direction, and you're going to get a lot more pace, maintaining pace. You know, it's kind of like the crew, people who row in crew. You know, you've got somebody in the very front who's pounding the pace out, or the galleys. Remember that? Well, that's what somebody needs to do.
Without that, if we're not able to accomplish that,
That tipping point's coming up.
yeah, we have
You know,
some,
and-
Joe here has a,
I mean, there's already, you know, they've already moved the
Excuse me, just, I did want to add, because I did hear on Friday from Earl Lycan that they did offer the project manager position to an individual. I don't have a name, but I just wanted to provide what I knew at this point. So my hope is that that person will be starting soon. So they do have an identified person, and an offer has been made.
Good.
Thank you.
good to know, thank you, hey.
Okay. Ms. Simon and then Vice President Jones.
So I just heard you say that HR has not come up to speed with what you think should be provided in terms, was it a summary or information that they would summarize for their part of the project?
What I've asked for, I mean, I haven't
Okay.
received it yet, is something exactly the same as what fiscal has, which is this long list on a spreadsheet of every scenario that needs to be tested. Okay? And so that is not, I am not aware of it being in place at this time.
Was there an agreement to do that by the director of HR, or no response?
It's really, that particular item is something that the contractor is supposed to provide, okay? I mean, and it's one of their deliverables. So it's just a matter of, the project management team needs to say, where is it? I'd like
Okay.
it, please. Otherwise, they're not gonna get paid, you know, I mean, because every deliverable has got a dollar associated with it. So, yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of, somebody's gotta crack the whip. So I don't think it's, you know, the executive levels, I mean, it's not their bailiwick.
It's the contractor
Well, in this particular case, the contractor's responsible for that, so, I mean, there's a
getting it
long.
from HR, no?
Well, no. I mean, the
Okay.
contractor is the one that says they understand what all the
Okay.
various scenarios are. You know, things like add an employee.
Okay.
You know, fire an employee, you know, provide the vacation benefits to an employee. I mean,
Just
that's,
the potentialities
yeah,
of
that's
what,
what the scenarios are.
got it.
Yeah.
I understand.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Vice President Jones.
You touched somewhat on my question, but hopefully the hire will work out. If not, is it possible do you see the likelihood of someone internally being hired or appointed? Describe maybe the skill set necessary for the project manager.
If you're unable to get a contractor to be the project manager, and if you recall, one of my suggestions was that contractor should report to someone other than IT, okay? If that does not happen, then probably what needs to happen is an internal person needs to be allocated full-time to the project, doing absolutely nothing else. And if it happens to be an IT person, they probably need to move from their cubicle or their office, and they need to sit somewhere else with the team, with the executive sponsor, whatever you think makes sense, because they need to be pulling everything together, and they need to have access at that level, and they need to be working with that level of the organization rather than being buried in IT. Because there's a tendency for them to start doing something else when they're in IT.
The person that we offered the position to is going to accept and is going to work out great. I'm putting that out there.
Okay, so I continue?
Yes, please.
Okay, so while we're still on this page of reconstitute a project management office, all that has to happen, is for someone to, in essence, write the charter for the project management office, which basically says, here's who the members are, here's who the chairman is, here's when we're meeting, here's where we're meeting, and here's who's supposed to report to the project management office and what documentation is going to be expected. And then here's the standard sample agenda of what you're going to cover. Take a couple hours to do that. Let's move. In my mind. So anyway, I've given suggestions as to who probably should be in that group. Well, why isn't this working here? Oh, here we go. So I'm sorry, I got out of sync here. What the heck happened here? Is it still up?
No.
No?
Can someone from the staff assist in getting this back on track?
Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay, here, I'm all right. Go back. Okay. Okay, so we talked about the project management office. And then this is a reminder, I've already talked about this, which is that there's a lot of rollouts in September and December. And we already talked about the fact that, it's important that HR meet this guideline of when you start open enrollment, and the same thing with payroll in terms of when it goes on. This is simply an example of the original project plan, the master plan, basically had all of the training buried in one of the early tasks. And so the training was never connected to the actual rollout. And so all I'm saying is, if you're planning a project and you need to know what sequential events have to take place, which means that you're defining the critical path. So that training needed to be down there with, hey, this is when we start this part of the system. And so I'm just suggesting that one of the adjustments to that plan needs to take place in this fashion.
Okay.
Okay, document management has been, as you know, a question. And the team has, examined various options of how to address and solve the issue of not spending money on a particular document management vendor. So these are the options that you see. And we've tried to kind of show what the impact is. A couple of the options, really mean a major delay in the project. So if you start thinking about completely replacing the existing legacy document management solution, it's going to create a huge bump in not only spend, but also in schedule. Now the team, I believe, has resolved what their option is, what they're recommending, what they're planning on doing. you know, my point to you, of course, is that ought to be in the April report. There's no reason why that shouldn't be in the April report. They should be able to stand up and say, this is what we're doing. Okay?
So you said you think they've made a decision. Do you know what that decision is?
I believe I do. Sometimes I get other comments from other people, but my understanding is that the team is planning on, you know, using the original design approach for solving document management for the system, okay? Which does not, to my understanding, does not require any additional charges or spend with the vendor in question, other than, I think, a $15,000 or $20,000 connector product. So,
Okay, fine.
okay?
Ms. Baker?
As long as we're talking here before we leave the major rollouts, there was some conversation, and do we have confirmation now that there will not be a dual system? That we will not be doing a manual existing system and moving forward with the rollouts at the same time? Did we determine that?
One of the questions you asked me last week, and I've got a slide that
You do?
addresses that, so
Oh, wait,
I'll
thank
show
you.
you, I'll show you that very specifically. The team, you know, basically tracks issues, which is a good thing. I mean, that's what they're supposed to do. I'm just highlighting one of the major issues is fairly significant, which is the whole issue of I've got to move employee master information from the existing legacy environment to the new one, all right? And I think I mentioned to you earlier, one example of some difficulties we're having right now is to figure out where the original hire date for everybody is in the legacy system. They're struggling with that, okay? But the point is they are tracking it, they are aware of it. But this is identified as a major risk, and if the team is unable to successfully move that information, extract the information and then move it to Infor on a timely basis, then the entire project is going to start slipping. Now, a lot of that information, they would expect to use a subset of all of that for integration testing. Critical path item. So if you have, let's say as an example, you are able to extract 8,000 employees from the master file, and then you sit there and say, well, now I'm not going to load all of them into the system. I'm going to load just a reduced set so that I can effectively run the test. So that's on the critical path. So if HR is going to start near the midpoint near the end of June of testing, then that means all that data's got to be extracted now. I mean, you got 3 weeks, 4 weeks. That's all you've got. So it's something that needs to be monitored, without a doubt. OCM, you know, organization change management is OCM, and in essence, that's mainly training now. The Infor statement of work only includes a limited amount of training and the development of training material. That limited amount means that there are some rollouts. Remember, there's 20 rollouts. That there's nothing in there about preparing the training material and actually delivering the training. So I think now what I'm learning is that HR has identified some resources, I think from HHS. So they're working this whole process and trying to, you know, in essence, plan out who's going to do what when. And this one, so now apparently, you know, everybody is agreeing that the county will take this on and not ask Infor, because that would require a change order. So you had some specific follow-up questions. The first one was validate the 20% that Public Works presented about 2 weeks ago. So in essence, then, the key thing here, I think, is we need to understand that the projection of 20% was made presuming the entire system is in place and operational. Okay, so they really weren't saying that we got 20%, on just one work order. I mean, they really didn't get into that. The other thing, if you'll recall, I talked, the last time we talked, I talked about how long it takes for benefits to get recognized. Okay, I think we need to recognize that while work order, the whole issue of getting benefits from automation to work orders is going to, I think I told you, it's going to happen a little better than the rest of the system and benefits because there's no automation today. So it's a change from no automation to some automation. And in that sense, you may get it, but I'm thinking it's probably going to be 6 to 12 months out. Start seeing 20%.
Okay, we have a question.
Thank you,
and
Mr.
it's from
Chairman.
Councilman Tron.
Actually, this was not an estimate. When they stood up there and said that, they gave a hard number of how many work orders that were done on that outside job processing, and they said that they were able to process a 20% higher increase number in that same exact window of time. So they didn't, that was not, that was actually a firm number that they had given when the director stood up there and actually said, running this, these were the work orders that went through, and this was the gain that they got, and this is how many more they processed under the new technology is what. So I just raised that only because that was the one I was asking for verification, not in anticipation that would be the go forward, but it was that really what they saw as far as the performance?
I did not get that information.
Okay.
What I did get is their annual billable hours projections, actuals, I mean, in terms of what their billable hours were. And the fact that they are basically suggesting that that they're going to be able to achieve increases in billable hours, all right? And so you'll see that here where right now the billable hours are tracked by person, by shift, by crew, per quarter for an average day. That's what Public Works is doing.
Well, it was my recollection that they actually gave specific number of work orders, and this was the gain. And I remember even saying, hey, based on that quick math, that is 20%. Because he gave a fixed number at the top and a fixed number of additional. And so at least that's the way I recall when he stood up there and talked about it.
I asked, and this,
Then I'll ask him again to make sure he puts it on a record as to what he said. Because I don't want him giving us firm numbers from that microphone and then coming back when you ask him to hold him accountable, say, show me the numbers, to give you general estimations for the go forward.
so. All right.
Please proceed.
Okay, so the rest of this is just, again, descriptions of what Public Works is suggesting, and their focus is on, the long-term effect of having additional information so they can make good decisions and so forth, and automating, streamlining the work order processes because they're doing it manually today. So that's basically what I was able to identify. Now, the next chart is almost impossible to read, and I apologize, but I was just trying to make sure that you get, in essence, the big picture. And what I've done on the left-hand side here is those are the 20 rollouts. So these are all the various rollouts. In blue, I have identified the legacy environments that are continuing to operate during this project. Okay? The yellow lines are the various history components that need to be maintained and need to be moved over to a new data warehouse in support of this when the system actually goes live. Okay? And so you can see the red arrows on the far right-hand side. That means it's going to continue on. That goes on. So some things to see and pick up on. The very first arrow is GIS. So the GIS system is, the geographical information system is connected right now to the work order system, and will continue, and so it will always stay in place and will continue to operate. The next blue line is the tax system. That will continue, all right? So it will connect, with the new system, but it will continue on, so that doesn't stop operating, all right? What I have circled there is there is one place where we're going to have dual entry. Okay, so our two systems are going to be operational, and that's going to be HR Pay, because HR is going to start in September, and payroll is going to start in December. And you need to keep everything in the current system for purposes of calculating benefits for the end of the year, okay, as well as W-2s and all that kind of thing. So that's where you're going to have about 3 months of dual entry in that situation. Okay, and the team knows this. I mean, this is coming from the team. Okay? So the rest of this is just a matter of showing you when the legacy systems stop operating. I mean, they're not used, all right? So clearly, when you have a rollout and you have a new thing going into place, then whatever it's replacing, you stop using it. And that's what this is showing you. Does that answer your question?
So does that take the pressure off of the rollout in September and December if we're anticipating running a dual system?
No. The duality is going to be in terms of calculating benefits and tracking, pay amounts and so forth. It's not going to be open enrollment, I mean, so open enrollment will be run, and then somebody's going to have, then everybody's going to have to say, well, now I got to go correct and make some updates and changes to the legacy environment based on that open enrollment.
And I'm not sure with your arrows, does the HR and payroll that's going to continue in a dual entry through the
End of the year.
through March 19?
No, the dual entry is only until you turn on the new payroll system, which is at the end of the year.
So by the end of the year, in the best case scenario,
You stop using it.
January
Yep.
19, we're on one system.
Correct. You stop using HR Pay, which happens to be the mainframe systems and so forth.
All right, thank you.
Continue.
Okay. So I just wanted to highlight the need for consolidated planning. I wanted to show you, this is a chart that actually was presented by the team to you several months ago. And it is trying to show you that there is a standard methodology and it's sequential. In other words, you do plan, design, build, test it, turn on system on, and then you support the system. I mean, that's the standard Infor methodology, and that's what the project team is using. And down below, it has the various tasks and so forth. The thing that was concerning to me, and if you look at the next page, is I've circled the items that are mainly county responsibility. Okay? This is the piece that was not, these are the pieces that were not effectively included in the overall master plan. They were done by work stream, they were on spreadsheets, they were not connected in, and that's why the areas, and of course you'll notice the areas are all about testing and data conversion and training. I mean, so those are the areas, they require county resources.
Those county resources on these circled items, is that part of the 25 million, or is that outside of that implementation?
Yes, it should be part of the 25 million. Absolutely. If you're going to do full costing for an asset, and if you have internal people working on it, then you should be allocating their time to the project. But it's not going to be a big number. I mean, just isn't. Most of the people that are putting time in on the project is, you look at it in terms of hours per week. I mean, it's not 40, it's, or percentages. I mean, I've just looked at their staffing plan where they've identified a lot of staff, which is a good thing. I mean, glad it's being done. But a lot of those things are saying, 0.1 of a week. 0.1, 10% of 40 hours is 4 hours. Okay?
Ms. Simon?
If I can follow up on the question of resources, you talked about the three legs of the stool, and one of them was the resources and staffing and time, right? What's your
Well,
impression,
resources, scope, and schedule.
schedule?
Yeah,
So we
resources
talked,
is people and dollars.
so those come together with this question, I think, about what the county responsibility is. Do you think that we're on target with, let's say, the man and woman power and the time putting into these components to keep us on track? Or would you, I just want your opinion to see if there's enough staffing and people putting in the time to make this project happen.
I am not in a position to answer that yet. And the reason is that the staffing plan that I have a copy of is focused mainly on user acceptance testing. You know, if you look at that, I mean, you'll see user acceptance, and that's kind of like the final go. I mean, that's when you're supposed to say everything, we're happy, let's turn it on. It requires, you know, internal people. Integrated systems testing, I don't see that yet. I'm looking for it, okay? And then same thing with data conversion. I mean, there are IT people that are designated and working and assigned to, you know, extracting information. I mean, that's from the legacy systems. That's happening. What I don't see is I don't see the people that are necessary to validate that. That requires somebody other than IT. And so those pieces are still being worked on, and so it's hard to answer that question, okay? But you know, generically, I mean, I still would prefer to see selected individuals literally dedicated full-time to the project, rather than give me 4 hours here, give me 4 hours here. When you do that, I mean, sometimes you don't get the hours.
What, do you know why that's happening?
Oh,
That's so
that-
fragmented.
Oh, that's easy. They all have a day job.
So it's a project comes back to a dedicated person.
They have a day job, and they're obviously required to do their work, and then they fill in when you try to do the project work.
Is anybody from IT dedicating all of their time to this, if you know?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Would you suggest that we would need more of that type of dedication of time?
You know, if you could get one or two people for every work stream that are non-IT dedicated, you know, I think the project would move along much better.
Has that been discussed at your meetings?
Well, what's been discussed is why, if we have a budget or a plan to spend $1.5 million of backfill, why don't we use it?
And what's the response, if anything?
Usually, the biggest concern is, well, they don't know our current systems, or they don't know our job, or they don't know county government. I mean, there's just a variety of reasons. Well, you know, I mean, if that's the case, then, you know, rather than spend 1.5 million on college students, you know, then maybe you sit there and say, well, I'll get some Infor people. I mean, I got a contract with them.
Okay.
And granted, I mean, you know, folks don't particularly want to say, well, we can't turn everything over to the contract people. So there's plenty of roadblocks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Proceed.
Just, all I wanted to show you is, you know, this is again the major rollouts, and it's just a matter of saying, hey, this is where all the rollouts occur. And there's preceding work that's going on right now, and that's all in the build and test environment right now. That's the stuff that's going on, with the exception of a couple of the rollouts which are just now starting, so they're going to be doing some design work. And then this is a reminder of where the county needs to be putting in their time. Okay, and we need to recognize that that's happening. So here, this we've already talked about. This is an example of the county responsibility. Fiscal's got 253 scripts or scenarios. Okay, to me that's a lot. But, you know, you have to cover everything. I mean, that's the purpose of it. So that's okay. But boy, you sure do need to say, well, how many people am I gonna need and when and what days? And they're working that. You know, again, my view tends to be, how long does it take me to do one script, and I go from there, okay? And I understand, and of course, the general reaction is when I say, well, how long does it take to do one script? The first thing I get is, they're not all the same. I understand that. You know, I understand that, you know, I mean, but you can sit there and say, I got 253 of them, and I can say, I've got easy, medium, and hard, and I can say, that's 15 minutes, that's 25 minutes, and that's 35 minutes. I mean, it's a calculation that you can make come out, and then the bottom line is, the only thing somebody can discuss with you is the 15 minutes reasonable? After that, it's a rough arithmetic. It's just, the number is gonna be whatever the number is, based on 253 times 2, or whatever the number is. Does that make sense? So,
So why, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, why aren't you getting answers? Like, don't they know? Don't they want to give it? Is there just, I mean, I don't understand.
people have different approaches to managing a project and estimating a project. They just do. I mean, some people, you know, use the green thumb approach, you know, I mean, they just do. And they sure, you know, well, it's just a matter of, you know, I'm not in a position to, you know, make them or teach them. I mean, you know, they've got people who know how to do projects. It's just that, you know, I mean, some people focus on schedules. Some people say, we just care about our due date. And I'm sitting there going, well, how can I maintain pace? How can I assure pace if I don't have checkpoints along the way? That's what I've done. Others may not.
Mr. Chair, can I have a follow-up question to that?
Yes, please.
So you have experience with this type of conversion. Do you know if right now the people with whom you're speaking have this level of experience on running this type of project?
It appears to me that the certainly the leadership in IT is pretty experienced. The project manager that is now working as the project planner, okay, it sounds like he's got quite a bit of experience, okay. And I haven't seen his product yet. I mean, tomorrow I'll see his product, but on the surface, I mean, it appears to be very experienced. The individual that was described for me, that I think Joe just told you that they've got an offer out, that individual has a lot of experience as well, and very large projects. I mean, this is a large project. Like, you know, I think I've told you, the work plan is 4,000 tasks, right? I mean, that's, you have to be able to work with that. And then it's probably gonna go to 6,000. And it's okay. That's okay. Brooklyn Bridge, probably 150,000 tasks, you know.
Councilman John.
And just following up on Ms. Simons, because I love clarity, and you brought it clarity. One scenario, what does it take? Give me and then whether you disagree or agree with the 15 minutes is irrelevant. It just fixes at least a concept. You started this out about an hour and 15 minutes ago with clarity saying the 8th day after the end of the month will bring clarity to whether or not they can even hit the report dates. That will be a microcosm of this project.
Sure.
We will be able to see the 8th day of every single month whether or not we see a performance report for the previous month. And if that's a reasonable number, I don't care, again, they might argue, say it should be the 10th, should be the, you know, whatever, but once we fix the date, that would be the same microcosm that you talked about of having one scenario. So to me, this will tell me volumes, whether they hit the 8th of June, the 8th of July, the 8th of August, and so on and so forth, once we agree to whatever that is, because that will be that same one scenario, 15 minutes agreement out there.
One of the things that I would hope will be always in those reports is the summary of the consolidated master plan. I mean, if you're updating that thing every week, and that, again, 6,000 line items, okay, the ones that are 100% complete, don't have to worry about those, right? But somebody's got to sit there and put it in there. Again, I'm sitting there going, well, if I've got a spreadsheet with 253 of these things, and I'm the team leader, I'm going to say, okay, have you finished all those? And I'm going to fill in the spreadsheet, and I'm going to count them at the bottom. I'm going to say, that's my percent complete. I go over to the master plan. I say, there's my number, and that number is dependent upon the validity of my detail spreadsheet. Okay. But then all I have to do is I've just simply got to summarize and report that thing. Instantly, it's available to you at the end of the week. Well, it's available to you anytime. It's just that if you update it at the end of the week, then that's going to be your most current information.
Could you give us a draft of what that 8th of every month report should look like? Is it a one-page, is it a summary, is it executive summary? And I don't mean to right now, but tell us what you think should be the minimal components that should be on that we as a 11-member panel should be looking at every month and saying, we're making progress, we're not making progress of those on that 1 page, 2 page, 5 page, whatever it should look like.
I provided a sample a while ago. You guys have had it.
Okay,
Yeah.
but have they agreed to it?
Oh.
Remember, agreement is part of clarity.
Yeah, I can only lead a horse to water. I mean, they're going to report what they think they need to report. I mean, I understand that,
Okay.
you know.
They're going to also report based on our requests too. So if there are missing components, I'd love for you to make sure you got clarity.
Again, I think it's important for you to see where you are in the schedule. And the way the team right now does that, first of all, they don't sequence the rollouts by date. They sequence them the way Infor likes to sequence them, which is by major category. Work streams. Okay, but if I'm trying to track how everything's going, I want to do it by the rollout date. That seems to be what's important. Then the other thing that's missing is they don't tell you where they are. They have that information. They just don't tell you where they are. So if I've got this little bar out here and here's the end date, then if I'm 60% complete, then I ought to have a spot that's at the 60% line, approximately. I mean, we all know that that's not precise. But boy, that's better than not having anything other than, I've got the number over here.
Thank you.
To follow up on Councilman Schwan's line, which I strongly support, would you start by telling them that we absolutely need the April report by Monday?
Sure.
And when we get the April report, we can have you look at the April report and give us your sense of how close it tracks to the components that should be included in the report. Kind of do a side-by-side comparison. And then we have Finance Committee scheduled for a week later. We'll squeeze it into the agenda to have, that's the first quarter financial report, but we'll squeeze it in to have a brief review of the April report at that time. I think that the way it's we can't do too much oversight on this. I think the more frequently we track this, the better. Zig, you don't need to be here for the 19th meeting,
Okay.
but we will do some kind of a review of the April report. Ms. Baker.
Just a curious question, a little bit more in the weeds than the big picture you just outlined. Is there a meeting of the minds that if the skill gap, which we've been told is a concern, and we've been told that for quite a while, is there a meeting of the minds that outsourcing is an option that is viable for the team to implement to get the project, not the operating part of it, but the project complete?
When you say a skill gap, I want to clarify and make sure that we're on the same page. Are we talking about the skill gap between current IT skills versus new IT skills? I mean, is that the skill gap?
Yes,
Okay.
we've been told that to hire is costly. Those that are in place now either don't have the tools or are resistant. And to get past that, I think you suggested at our last meeting that you would suggest outsourcing to get us past those challenges and then get into a trading mode once we're up and running. Is that a concept that the team is embracing if needed?
I think certainly the team is starting down that path. But their focus, continues to be building their post-go-live team. There's a tremendous focus on that. So there's a focus on, well, look, we have these job descriptions and we have these roles in that group. And I keep suggesting, well, really what you need is just some contractors to get the project done. Whatever you got to do, get those contractors in there to get the project done, and then worry about it. And if it takes 6 months to hire positions, fine. Start the process, but don't sit there and worry about the project. Let those people happen when they happen. If it takes 6 months to get them, fine. Yeah.
Is that being embraced? Do you see a consensus that although we are concerned about rolling it out and having those people in place once the project's done, I agree, you need to get the project done. Are you concerned at all that we may be not paying enough attention to that piece of it and that we may lose time when we realize we don't have the pieces in place?
I think the leadership is going down that path at this time, but they're moving it from the top down. So they're just focusing on the project manager roles and that sort of thing. There's no question that they need resources on the actual detailed technical group, and I quite frankly don't know where they stand on bringing in contractors to support the technical team. Again, I just don't know where they stand.
We'll know more when the project manager is in place, and that may be a question for him.
Okay, please proceed.
I'm finished.
You're finished?
Yeah.
Okay.
My conclusion here is, I'm on the whole consolidated project plan, and again, I just repeat that last statement. I really, if they use a Microsoft project and they use that plan, they put all those tasks in there and they do all the scheduling, then they can generate a summary instantly. I mean, you can make it look pretty if you want, but the point is that the data is there, and they can do that. And the other thing that they can do is that here's the current date, and where are they in relationship to the current date? Either they're ahead or behind, and that kind of information, to me, is crucial with overall observations and review, if you will, of project status.
I would like to thank you very much for the assistance that you've provided. I think you've brought some clarity to some of the challenges that we face, and I firmly believe that we're fully capable of implementing this project roughly on schedule. But it's far from guaranteed. It's possible, but it's going to take a lot, and we're going to have to continue to monitor this very closely. So before we adjourn, I would just ask if anybody has any further questions. I don't see any, and is there any miscellaneous business? There being nothing further that holds our attention, this work session is adjourned. Thanks very much, everybody.